So in this video, we're going to build this scene right here. We're going to do a sky replacement using the magnetic mask. We're also going to use some object tracking to help keep the actual sky in line and in sync with the ground and with the camera movements. And then after that, we'll composite a subject into the scene. And then finally, we'll do some color correction to help make it all kind of come together and blend as seamlessly as possible. So I hope that you're excited to get started. Let's dive in. Before we actually get started in Final Cut Pro, if you're interested in getting the project files for this video, you can go to my website at www.emerden.com, and there you can become a member. Members on my site will have access to the project files for my YouTube videos. They'll also get a 50% coupon every month for any of the different products that I have for sale on my website. They'll also get early access to any plugins or courses that I create. And then finally, members will get exclusive access to any content that I create that's for members only and is only available on my website. I'm just kicking off memberships on my website, but I'm really hoping to build a community of people who are like-minded and who really love video editing and production as much as I do. So if that's something that interests you, then definitely hop over to my website and check that out. So now over here in Final Cut Pro, we have all of the assets we're going to need to be able to actually create this project. We have these background clouds here, and these are ultimately going to be what we use to replace the sky. Now this clip right here is actually just of a desert landscape, and we're going to kind of be panning across that, and we will be replacing this sky here with this darker, kind of more ominous sky. And then finally, we have this clip of the woman who's just kind of looking back and forth, and she's ultimately going to become the main subject in our video. Now these are the three main pieces that we're going to need. So now let's dive into actually putting this together. So the first step here is to add the clouds to our primary storyline because they're ultimately going to be the backdrop of everything. And so to do that, we're just going to click on the actual clip over here. We're going to hit the E key to add that to our timeline. And then on top of that, we need to add this clip right here. So we can make sure that our playhead is all the way back at the beginning. And then if you click on this clip up here and you hit the Q key, that's going to essentially connect it to the primary storyline, and it's going to make it on top of the primary storyline. Now, so far, this is all we need. We just need these two clips here because we're going to essentially remove the sky now and make it so that this clip in the background is behind it. And now that we have these two clips here, we'll just actually kind of go to the end of this one and we'll just trim this bottom clip back. I'll hold down the Option key and hit the square bracket. And then now these two clips are the same length and we can actually work with these two clips that we have here. Now the next step to this is replacing the sky. So to do that, we're going to click on this desert clip up here and we're going to go over here and we're going to add a magnetic mask to this clip. So now that we've added the magnetic mask here, we're actually going to select the sky and we're going to use the sky as our mask, but then we're going to invert the mask so that it's only leaving the land. So pick any spot in the sky here and just click. And it should actually select most of this because this sky right here is actually pretty basic. And so if you just kind of select a few of the spots here, so make sure that it gets the whole sky, make sure it's just kind of getting along those edges correctly. And now that we've selected what we need for the sky, we're going to analyze this magnetic mask. Okay, so now that we've applied the actual mask, we can hit done here, and you can see now that it's applied the mask to the actual sky itself. And so what we want to do now is we want to invert the mask. So if we come over here to the magnetic mask and we click on this little icon here, we can click invert masks, and now our cloudy sky is in the background here and our land is in the front. And so basically we've now removed the sky from the actual desert landscape, and now we have our cloudy kind of rolling thunder sky in the background. And so that's exactly what we want. But now if you take a look at this, we're just going to kind of play it and watch. You can see that the sky is kind of like moving in a weird way, and it's not really moving with the land. And also the sky is a little bit too kind of perfect and clear. So we're going to do a couple of things here. The first thing I'm going to do is click on the sky over here, and I'm going to go down to my actual effects down here, and I'm going to look for the blur effects, and I'm just going to drop a Gaussian blur on top of the clouds there. Now, obviously that's going to be way too intense. So what I want to do is take the Gaussian blur all the way down to about 5. So I'm actually just going to type 5 in there and hit enter. And so now it's just a little bit blurry in the background here. We're going to do the same thing to the landscape in a second, but that's just going to add a little bit of blur to the clouds to make it look more like it's in the background. And then while we're at it, why don't we just do the same thing here? Why don't we just grab the Gaussian blur and we'll drop that onto our landscape as well. Obviously, we don't want the landscape that blurry either. So we're just going to set this one to 5. And now they're both a little bit blurry and kind of like going to be our background, right? So we don't want them to be perfectly clear because we're going to eventually have a subject here that's standing in the front. And so if we add that little bit of blur to both of them, it kind of adds to the realism of the scene. Again, when you watch this, you can see that the sky is kind of like awkward in the ground. That's because the sky and the ground are not kind of synced together. So the way that we're going to sync the sky and the ground together is we're going to use an object tracker. So I'm going to click on the actual desert here, and I'm going to scroll all the way down here, and down in the trackers option here, I'm going to add an object tracker to the scene. And then I'm going to make it a circle so I can just kind of pull on that corner. And then I'm going to hold down Shift and just resize this way down so it's kind of a small little circle like that. And I'm going to just move this over top of something that has contrast. Now, this rock right here is very contrasted against everything else. So I'm actually going to use that as my object that I'm going to track. So I'm going to drop the tracker there, and then we have to go ahead and analyze the tracker so that it's prepared and it's following that rock. So we'll click Analyze, and you can see as it analyzes, it's following along that rock and doing exactly what I want it to. Okay, so now we've successfully applied a tracker, and if I kind of move this along in different spots, you'll see that this tracker is staying with that actual spot in the desert. So that's exactly what I want it to do. And now what I want to do is I want to connect the sky to that object tracker. So I'm going to actually click on the sky, and then I'm going to click on the transform tool here. And now you should see up here an option for a tracker. So if I click on that little drop down arrow and I go to tracker here, I can choose object track, which is the name of the tracker, because if we were to go back here to this and we were to scroll down, you can see that the name of the tracker here is object track. Now you could name that whatever you want, but I'm just going to leave it as its default. And now if we go back to here and we click on tracker again, just to look, now we've associated that object tracker to the actual sky, and so now the sky is going to stay with the ground. We only want it to stay with position. We don't want it to actually rotate at all. So we're going to uncheck rotation here, and then if we go back and we watch, you can see now that the sky video clip is actually staying with the foreground and it's following it like it should. Now, obviously there's a problem because it's basically moving the clip away, and now we have black in the background here. So what we need to do now is we need to scale up and kind of reposition that sky background so that it fits and it stays in front of this image the whole time. So I'm going to actually just click on here, and I'm going to go over to scale and position, and I'm going to use some values that I've kind of already figured out ahead of time, but you basically, if you wanted to try to figure it out, you could just kind of rescale this and play around with it and see what works. But I'm going to rescale mine to 167.85, and that's going to be fully scaled up the way I want it. Now you can see that it's still off over here because I'm going to reposition this now so it fits better on the screen. So I'm going to make the x-axis negative 304.6, and I'm going to make the y-axis 562.6, like that. And now it's actually positioned correctly on the screen. I'll click done really quick, and if I were to just kind of zoom out so we could see the whole thing, you can see that my actual image is scaled properly now. And so now if I go back and I play it, it's actually going to stay attached and stay visible through the entire clip. And you can see now that the sky actually stays with the image as it passes through. So this combination of using the magnetic mask to eliminate the sky, but also an object tracker to keep the sky attached to the actual foreground image and moving along correctly with it, is the best approach here for doing a sky replacement in Final Cut Pro. So now we have the background the way we want it, with the rolling sky and the rolling clouds in the background and the foreground, and they're both attached to each other and they're kind of moving in sync with each other like we would expect. So now that we've used the magnetic mask to replace the sky, we've also used some object tracking to keep that sky in alignment with the ground and with the camera motions. Let's go ahead and add in our subject, and we're going to composite that subject in using the magnetic mask as well. So again, like we did before, we're going to scroll back here to the beginning. We're going to click on this and we're going to hit the Q key to actually bring our subject on top and attach it to our primary storyline. Now our subject is going to be in the foreground. She's going to be covering everything up completely, and we're going to need to use the magnetic mask again to cut her out of this scene. So we'll click on there, we'll go over here to the magic wand and we'll go to add magnetic mask, and then again we're just going to select our subject, and we're going to make sure that we select all the different parts of her, make sure that we've kind of covered everything we need to here. And again, the magnetic mask does a really good job of selecting the actual subject. And now all we have to do is go up here and analyze this, and then we will have her masked out as well. Okay, so now we have that actual magnetic mask completely analyzed, and we can click done. And now our subject is placed in front of our scene. And if we just kind of scroll through here, you can see now that our subject is basically staying in place in front. And so it looks a little awkward because now the background is moving, but it's not moving in relationship to our subject. And of course, you can see that we've got a little extra here at the end. So I'm just going to go to there, click on my subject video, make sure that I'm at the end, and then again I'm going to do the option key and the square bracket to just kind of trim that back. But we also need to now add our subject to that object tracker so that our subject stays in sync with the background as well. So if we click on our subject here and we click on the transform tool over here, we go up to our tracker, we can then add object track to our subject as well. And then we just also want to make sure that we don't have rotation checked, so it's just position. We'll go up here, we'll click done, and then now we can actually play this and see how our actual subject stays connected to the actual scene, and she's kind of moving with the camera and the scene as well. So it's actually really cool. She kind of looks over, very cool. I think I want to move her over a little bit so that she ends up kind of more like right around here instead of being off screen. So I'm going to kind of bring that over like this. And we're going to click on the transform tool again here, and I'm just going to move her over a little bit so that she kind of ends up here instead of that far left like that. So we'll kind of go back here and just see where she starts. Okay, so she's kind of starting over there. I like that. And then as it goes and plays, she's kind of moving with the background. Everything's kind of in sync now. And so as the camera pans around, she's staying on the scene and she kind of looks over like that. Yeah, I like that much better. I think that looks a lot better. And so now we can actually kind of do a little bit of tweaking here. So the first thing I'm seeing here is that you can see a little bit of a border around some of the masked parts of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my landscape and make sure that I have that selected. And I'm going to go over to the mask that's applied to that landscape like this. And I'm going to feather it just a little bit. So maybe feather it somewhere around like 12. See how it kind of is? If you pay attention right here on the background, you can see that as I kind of feather this in either direction, you can see that border kind of grow and shrink, right? So ultimately, I think I want to go like maybe somewhere around 13 like that. That looks pretty good. So that kind of gets rid of the border that was there. And now I want to get rid of the border that's around her over here. So I'm going to click on that actual clip here. Click done. Now I'm going to go up to the magnetic mask, and for this one I think I'm going to have to do it in the negative direction, because remember, this magnetic mask that we used here was inverted, so that's why we were able to go into the positive. But on her, she's not inverted, and so we're going to have to go into the negative here to get rid of that line. And I think if we kind of go back to maybe like a -50, that should be good. Yeah, so -50 looks good because that basically got rid of that kind of white line that was going around her. So yeah, I think that did a good job. So now we have our background in place, we have our character and everything kind of masked out, and we've feathered it so it's all kind of blending pretty well together. So now what I want to do is I want to throw an adjustment layer on top of this, because ultimately these kind of like nice warm colors and stuff like that aren't really what I'm going for in the final composition of this. So I want to add an adjustment layer on top of this to kind of colorize the whole thing. So I'm going to go over here to my titles, and I'm going to go into my titles here. I'm going to go to my Emberden titles, and I'm going to use the Emberden adjustment layer. If you don't already have this, you can grab this for free from my website, www.emberden.com. Download it. It's a really good adjustment layer. There's also many other adjustment layers out there from many other creators, so if you already have one, then that will probably do as well. I'm going to use my adjustment layer because it has some extra features and some options that I'll use here, but other adjustment layers will work. You'll just have to kind of, instead of using the features built into the adjustment layer, you'll have to apply a colorize effect to your adjustment layer and then adjust that accordingly. But for mine, I'm just going to drag the actual adjustment layer over top, and I'm going to make it the same size as my clips here. And then if I click on the adjustment layer over here, I can go into the actual title options. Now I'm going to go ahead and enable the colorize option in here. And I don't really want it to be this sepia tone color. So if I click over here, I'm going to get this color option, and I'm going to bring that down into more kind of the blue range. I think kind of somewhere maybe about there is good. And then over here, I'm going to change the blacks to also fall into that blue range. So I'm going to kind of take it down maybe like that. And so now what I've done is I've colorized the scene so that it kind of has more of a blue hue to it. And then I'm going to go over here to the mix option in the adjustment layer, and I'm going to reduce the mix down so that it's not fully colorized, but that it has some kind of hints of colorization like that. And I think that looks pretty good. I think that it's kind of added like a blue hue to it, but it's kind of letting some of the colors seep through. I do like the blue colorization to it, but I also want to kind of bring out some of the saturation in some of these other colors that are here. So add a little bit more saturation to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a color wheel to the actual landscape in the background. So I'm going to click on my landscape over here, and I'm going to go up to my color options here, and I'm going to make some adjustments to these color wheels. Now, I want to actually make some adjustments to these settings that are down here in the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click on my inspector, and so that it's all visible all the way down through here. Now, when I did this the first time, kind of playing around, I basically manually went through and adjusted some of these settings like this. And by manually adjusting them and finding the right kind of like highlights and brightness and saturation and things like that, I was able to come up with some specific numbers that I'm going to use here. So what I'm going to do just for you to make this easier and so that the outcome is the same, I'm going to go through and actually add the numbers in here. So I'm going to show the shadows here, and I'm going to make the saturation 1, but I'm going to make the brightness negative 0.13. So I'm just going to click in here and say negative 0.13. And then that's going to be the actual brightness for these shadows. And you can see how it's kind of already starting to change the background and making it pop a little bit more. So I'm going to do the same thing with midtones. We'll go over here to midtones, and I'm going to make the saturation here 1.23 so that it's kind of saturated a little bit more. And then I'm going to set the brightness to negative 0.17, negative 0.17. And now for highlights, I'm going to adjust this, and I'm going to make the saturation 1.22 so that the highlights kind of get a little bit more saturated. You can see the orange starting to kind of pop through a little bit more. And then also I'm going to make the brightness 0.09. So now it's kind of, the background is actually kind of popping a little bit through the blue hue that's sitting over top of it. And so it kind of adds like this kind of interesting look to it. And so that's how I'm going to apply the color wheels here to this actual landscape. Now, again, I went through and manually moved these sliders up and down to find these results before. So you don't actually have to go through and enter the numbers in. You can go through and move these around and find the one that works best for you. Now, I've added this to the actual landscape, but I want to kind of make some of the colors in her kind of pop a little bit more too. So we're going to go to the actual lady here, and I'm going to adjust the color wheels for her as well. For her, the saturation in the shadow is going to be 1.49. So it's going to kind of, you can see already how it's starting to kind of pop out a little bit more, and it's a little bit more interesting. The brightness is going to be negative 0.16, so negative 0.16. And now it's kind of brought the brightness down, right? So we're bringing the brightness down on the shadows so it kind of makes her stand out. It's essentially adding some contrast to both her and the background so that they're a little bit more interesting and they kind of pop more in the image. The midtones, I'm going to adjust those so that the saturation is 1.32. And I'm going to make the brightness -0.22. Like that. Again, making her kind of pop a little bit more in this image, and it's kind of making it more interesting to look at. The highlights, we'll adjust those. So we'll say that the saturation is going to be 0.51. So it's going to desaturate the highlights a little bit. And then on top of that, we're going to set the brightness to 0.09. And so it kind of makes her pop a little bit. You've got this kind of highlights standing out a little bit, but the midtones and the shadows are kind of a little bit more saturated and the brightness is dropped down a little bit on them. Okay, and that's actually looking really good. I think that this background is kind of starting to pop a little bit. She's kind of standing out more in the image. I think it might be a little bit too sharp around here. So I think on the subject here, I'm going to add a focus blur around her a little bit to kind of make it a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to drop that focus blur on her. Now, of course, that is way too much, right? That we don't want it to be that intense. So I'm just going to adjust some of these levels. I'm going to bring the amount down all the way down to maybe about like 9-ish, something like that. Maybe about like 9.1. That's pretty good. 9.14. Perfect. Great number. Now the softness, I'm going to drop that all the way down to about 150 something. So we'll just kind of drop this down. Maybe right about there looks good to me. I think that looks good. We'll set the emphasis to something like 39-ish, somewhere around here. 38, 39, yeah, that looks good. And then the width, I'm going to make it so that it spans out a little bit wider than her so that it's really just kind of catching the edges of her. So the width, I'm going to make it go more like to the 78-ish. I don't want to go too far. I want to kind of find just the outer edge of her like that. So I think maybe around like 78, something like that. 77, perfect. That's good. I'm happy with that. Now the height, I'm going to go somewhere in like the 72 range. So I want to kind of go up because if I go too small, then it basically blurs her all, right? So I want to kind of make it so it's tall enough that it's just kind of like hitting the upper edge of her. Maybe somewhere around like that actually would be pretty good. I think I like that. I think I'm going to go with like 34 there. I like that a lot. And then I'm going to take this center point here and I want to put the center point to be like right on her eye so that the focal point of her is the eye and that there's a tiny amount of blur kind of happening around the outer edge of her. That's ultimately the goal with this focus blur. I think I'm going to stop right here, and this is going to be the final product. So I'm going to just throw some music on this. I'm going to render it out for you so that you can see the finished product. The music that I throw on this will not be in the project files. If you're a member and you go and you download the project files, the music is not going to be in here, but you can find music anywhere you want to add the music to the video. The reason I'm not going to throw the music in here is because the music that I'm going to throw on here is actually from a site called Artlist, and while it is royalty free when you are paying a subscription for it, I can't actually provide that file to you to download. So I'm going to use that file for the music just for this video, but feel free to go grab whatever music you want to throw on the finished product. But this is definitely a really cool finished product. So let's render it out and take a look at that. And so that's it. We were able to create this amazing scene using Final Cut Pro, where we were able to do a sky replacement using the magnetic mask. We were able to then use object tracking to actually keep the sky in alignment with the ground, and then also keep it in alignment with the camera motions. And then on top of that, we were able to composite a subject into the scene using the magnetic mask, and then add color correction on top of that to make sure that it all kind of looked good and it blended together seamlessly. And like I said, doing projects like this is a great thing to do when you're just trying to practice the skills that you've learned in Final Cut Pro. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching. And as always, if you thought that this video was cool, you should definitely check out that one.